My name is Jake, and until recently, I would have described my life as a picture-perfect tableau of marital bliss. For 4 years, my wife Allison and I have enjoyed what many would consider a model marriage. Our home, a charming two-story house nestled in a quiet neighborhood, has always felt like a sanctuary, a place where we could retreat from the world and build our dreams together. Allison and I met in college, where our connection was instant. Her laughter was infectious, and her kindness was evident in everything she did. We quickly became inseparable, and by the time we graduated, it was clear that our bond was something extraordinary. I remember our wedding day vividly, Allison walking down the aisle in a beautiful white gown, her eyes sparkling with joy. It felt like the start of an endless adventure. Our first years of marriage were everything we had hoped for. We spent weekends exploring the city, cooking elaborate dinners together and planning our future. We talked about starting a family someday, buying a bigger house and growing old together. Our home, with its warm, inviting colors and cozy furnishings, was a reflection of our life together, filled with love, laughter, and shared dreams. But lately, something had begun to change. It started subtly, a missed dinner here, a late night at work there. Allison, who had always been so attentive and present, seemed to be drifting away. I chalked it up to the pressures of her job, as she often worked long hours and took on additional responsibilities. Her career was important to her, and I admired her ambition. But as the days turned into weeks, her absences became more frequent, and her demeanor more distant. Despite my efforts to understand and support her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Our once easy conversations became strained, and the warmth that used to define our interactions seemed to have dimmed. I wanted to believe it was just stress or fatigue, but a nagging sense of unease began to take root. Amid our otherwise idyllic life, these changes were a stark contrast to the happiness we once shared. Our plans for the future, our dreams, now seemed uncertain. The house that had always been our haven began to feel like a place where I was increasingly alone. I tried to push these thoughts aside, focusing on the positives, but deep down, I knew something was profoundly wrong. Little did I know that the cracks in our seemingly perfect life were only the beginning of a much deeper and more painful unraveling. In the tapestry of my life, Alex was one of the most vibrant and dependable threads. We had been best friends for over a decade, and our bond was forged through countless shared experiences and mutual respect. From our college days to our current adult lives, Alex had been a constant presence, someone I trusted implicitly and admired deeply. Alex was the kind of friend who knew you inside and out, yet still managed to surprise you with his unwavering support and genuine concern. We met during our sophomore year of college when we were both assigned to the same dormitory. It didn't take long for us to hit it off, and our friendship quickly became one of the most important relationships in my life. Our common interests, sports, movies, and a shared sense of humor, provided the foundation for a connection that grew stronger over time. He was a natural when it came to making friends, and effortlessly became part of our group. His charisma was undeniable. He had this rare ability to make everyone feel at ease and included. Whether we were discussing the latest sports game, debating the merits of different movie genres, or just hanging out and relaxing, Alex had a knack for turning ordinary moments into memorable ones. Professionally, Alex was a dedicated and successful individual. He worked in finance, a field that suited his analytical mind and meticulous nature. I often admired his work ethic and the way he approached challenges with a level-headed, strategic mindset. His career achievements were a testament to his skills and determination, and I often found myself seeking his advice on various matters, both personal and professional. In our social circles, Alex was known as the go-to guy for advice and support. He was the one who'd show up at a friend's door in the middle of the night if they needed help, and his loyalty was never in question. For me, he was more than just a friend. He was a confidant, a mentor, and at times like the brother I never had. Our bond was characterized by mutual trust and an unspoken understanding that we could rely on each other no matter what. We often spent weekends together, whether it was catching a game at a local bar, exploring new restaurants, or simply enjoying a movie night. Our conversations ranged from lighthearted banter to deep discussions about our aspirations and fears. It was in these moments of candidness that I felt our friendship truly flourished. Alex's ability to listen without judgment, and offer thoughtful advice made him an indispensable part of my life. As I look back, it's clear that Alex was one of those rare friends who could seamlessly blend into any situation while remaining a rock-solid presence in my life. His influence and companionship had shaped many aspects of who I was and who I had become. And while I had always considered him a steadfast friend, little did I know that this trust and closeness would soon be tested in ways I could never have anticipated. It started subtly, an imperceptible shift in the rhythm of our daily life that was easy to overlook if you weren't paying close attention. For months, I had been swept up in the routine of our marriage, feeling secure in the belief that everything was as it should be. Allison and I had always been in sync, sharing our joys and challenges, and our home was a reflection of that harmony. But recently, a series of small, disconcerting changes began to disrupt that harmony, and I found myself grappling with an unsettling sense of unease. Allison's behavior started to shift around 6 months ago. At first, it was just the occasional missed family dinner or an unexpected late night at work. I attributed these changes to her increasing workload, which she had mentioned was particularly demanding. She'd come home exhausted and would often retreat to our bedroom, leaving me to handle dinner or deal with any household tasks alone. I tried to be understanding, recognizing that her job was important and that everyone goes through stressful periods. As the weeks went by, however, the instances of her absence grew more frequent. Allison, who had once been a steadfast presence at our family gatherings and social events, began to skip them with increasing regularity. Birthdays, anniversaries, and even casual get-togethers with friends. She had excuses for missing them all. Her explanations were always plausible: an urgent meeting, a last-minute project, or a critical issue that needed her attention. Yet, the frequency with which these emergencies arose made me question whether there was more to the story. Our conversations, once filled with ease and warmth, started to become more strained. I would try to discuss our plans for the weekend or talk about something that had happened during my day, only to be met with brief, distracted responses. Allison seemed preoccupied, her mind elsewhere, and her responses were often curt and lacking in the genuine interest that had once characterized our interactions. This emotional distance was palpable, creating an invisible barrier between us that I couldn't quite penetrate. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, I noticed Allison's phone on the kitchen counter. It buzzed repeatedly with incoming messages. Curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced at the screen. Most of the messages were from colleagues, but there was one thread that stood out: an ongoing conversation with someone named Alex. The frequency and familiarity of their exchanges made me uneasy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. It wasn't just the missed events or the distant conversations. There was also a change in Allison's demeanor. She seemed more guarded and less willing to share her thoughts and feelings with me. Her once open and affectionate nature had been replaced by a more reserved and aloof attitude. Even our quiet moments at home, once so comfortable and intimate, felt tense and fraught with unspoken words. These early signs were subtle but persistent, and they began to gnaw at me, eroding the sense of security I had once taken for granted. I wanted to believe that it was merely a phase or a result of stress, but deep down, I couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that something deeper was troubling our marriage. The dissonance between the life we had built together and the reality of our present situation became increasingly hard to ignore, and I found myself grappling with a gnawing uncertainty about the future of our relationship. It was a restless night when the seed of suspicion truly took root. I had returned home late from work, eager to unwind and catch up on the day's events with Allison. She had been out of touch throughout the day, and I was looking forward to reconnecting. Instead, I found myself alone, the house eerily quiet, with Allison still not home. Her phone, which she had left on the kitchen counter, buzzed intermittently with incoming messages. On a whim, I decided to check her phone, feeling a growing sense of unease. I justified it to myself as a matter of concern, wanting to understand what was consuming her time and attention. As I skimmed through the messages, my heart sank. There was a conversation thread between Allison and Alex, our mutual friend, that was filled with casual yet intimate language. Phrases like "miss you" and "wish I could be there" were interspersed with plans for meetings and quick updates about their day. The frequency and tone of their exchanges struck me as more personal than one would expect from a casual friendship. I had always known that Allison and Alex were close, but this level of familiarity seemed to transcend the boundaries of simple friendship. The messages were filled with inside jokes and shared experiences that made me feel like an outsider looking in on a relationship that was rapidly growing beyond my understanding. My doubts began to crystallize into something more tangible, a feeling that something was amiss. The sudden, almost clandestine nature of their communication made me question whether there was more to their interactions than met the eye. I had to find out what was happening, so I decided to observe them more closely. Determined to uncover the truth, I embarked on a plan to observe Allison and Alex. I began by noting their schedules and the times when Allison would claim to be working late or attending meetings. I had already noticed that these instances often coincided with Alex's free time, and I wanted to see if there was a pattern to their meetings. One evening, when Allison had said she had a late work event, I decided to follow her discreetly. I waited until she left the house and then got into my car, keeping a safe distance as I trailed her. The drive was a mixture of anxiety and determination, my heart pounding as I followed her to a nearby cafe. I parked across the street, watching as she entered the building. Inside, Allison was greeted warmly by Alex, who was already seated at a corner table. They embraced briefly, a gesture that felt more intimate than a mere friendly greeting. As they settled in, I could see them talking animatedly, their body language relaxed and comfortable. They laughed easily, leaning in close, their interactions more personal than what one would expect between a friend and a friend's spouse. I watched them for an hour, feeling like an intruder in a private moment. It was clear that their connection was more profound and intimate than I had initially realized. The way they interacted, touching each other's arms, sharing private jokes, and engaging in deep conversation, confirmed my worst fears. Their behavior suggested a level of intimacy that went beyond mere friendship. The more I observed, the more my suspicions were confirmed. Allison and Alex's interactions were undeniably affectionate and personal. It was evident that their relationship had evolved into something that was not just emotional, but potentially physical. The lines of their friendship had blurred, leaving me with a heavy heart and a clear sense that the trust I had in both of them was being betrayed. As I drove home, the weight of what I had seen settled heavily on my shoulders. I now faced the daunting task of confronting Allison and Alex with the evidence of their transgressions, fully aware that my marriage and my friendship were on the line. The realization that their relationship had become something I could no longer ignore filled me with a mix of betrayal, anger, and determination to seek the truth. It was a day that started like any other, but it would soon become one of the most pivotal moments of my life. I had finished work earlier than usual, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation as I headed home. Allison had mentioned a late meeting that evening, so I expected to have the house to myself. It was a chance to enjoy a quiet evening and perhaps reflect on the growing concerns that had been plaguing me. As I approached our home, a sudden gnawing sense of unease gripped me. I brushed it off as anxiety over the ongoing issues in our relationship, trying to focus on the normalcy of my routine. When I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, I noticed an unusual quietness, one that was eerily out of place. I called out to Allison, but there was no response. Curiosity and apprehension led me towards the sound of low, muffled voices coming from our bedroom. The familiar, comforting space of our bedroom had always been a haven of intimacy and trust. Now, it was a place I was about to discover as the stage for a heart-wrenching betrayal. With a deep breath and a trembling hand, I pushed open the bedroom door, bracing myself for what I was about to see. What I encountered was a scene that shattered my world in an instant. There, in the sanctuary of our home, Allison and Alex were entwined in a moment of intimacy that left no room for misunderstanding. Allison was in bed, her expression one of surprise and guilt, while Alex, equally stunned, was caught in the act of betrayal. The sight was both surreal and devastating. My mind struggled to process the reality of what was happening before my eyes. The betrayal was not just physical, it was a profound violation of trust and intimacy. Seeing the two of them together in our home, in the very place where we had built our life, felt like a personal assault. The anger that surged through me was raw and all-consuming. Every moment of doubt and suspicion that had been growing within me suddenly crystallized into a painful, undeniable truth. As I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of the revelation, Allison's and Alex's faces shifted from shock to immediate attempts to cover up their actions. Allison scrambled to cover herself, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and shame. Alex, equally disoriented, fumbled for his clothes, his face flushed with guilt. The room, which had once been a symbol of our shared life, now felt like a battleground of emotions. At that moment, I felt a profound sense of betrayal, not just from Allison, whom I had loved and trusted, but also from Alex, who had been my closest friend. The foundations of my life seemed to crumble before me, replaced by a stark, painful reality that left me grappling with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and heartache. The home that had once been a place of comfort and joy had become a stark reminder of the deep wounds inflicted by those I had held closest. The confrontation that followed was charged with raw emotion. Allison tried to explain, her voice trembling and full of regret, but her words felt hollow against the backdrop of what I had just witnessed. Alex, too, offered apologies and explanations, but they were insufficient against the overwhelming reality of their betrayal. The trust that had once been the bedrock of our relationship was irrevocably shattered, leaving me with a deep sense of loss and a painful realization of the enormity of the betrayal. After the shock of discovering Allison and Alex together in our home, I needed to have a conversation with Allison that would lay bare the truth of the situation. The emotional turmoil I felt was overwhelming, but I knew I had to confront her directly to understand her side and to address the breach of trust that had so profoundly affected me. That evening, after the initial shock had begun to settle, I asked Allison to sit down with me in the living room. The space that had once been filled with laughter and warmth now felt cold and sterile, reflecting the emotional distance that had grown between us. As we sat across from each other, the weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. "I need you to tell me why," I began, my voice steady but laced with anger and hurt. "Why did this happen? I saw everything. There's no denying it. How could you do this to me, to us?" Allison's face was pale, her eyes red from the tears she had tried to hide. She looked down, unable to meet my gaze directly. Her voice was trembling as she began to speak, her words a mix of excuses and justifications. "I'm so sorry, Jake," she said, her voice breaking. "I know this looks terrible, and it is, but things have been so difficult lately. I felt like you were so distant. You were always working late or distracted. I felt like I was losing you, and Alex was there for me." Her explanations were a blur of regret and blame. She spoke of feeling neglected and unappreciated, of how the emotional distance between us had made her vulnerable. "I never intended for things to go this far," she continued, her voice filled with desperation. "It started with emotional support, and then it just escalated. I didn't know how to stop it." As I listened to her, the anger inside me grew. Her justifications did little to heal the wounds or undo the betrayal. The very essence of our relationship had been violated, and her reasons, while they might have explained some of her feelings, could not excuse the choices she had made. "Allison," I said, struggling to keep my voice even, "no amount of feeling neglected justifies what you've done. You had a choice, and you chose to betray me." Her attempts to rationalize her actions felt like salt in the wounds. She pleaded with me, trying to convey her regret and hoping for some semblance of understanding or forgiveness. But the depth of her betrayal had created a chasm that words alone could not bridge. After my painful conversation with Allison, I knew I needed to address the situation with Alex. He had been my closest friend, and now I faced the task of confronting him about his role in this betrayal. The evening was heavy with tension as I arranged to meet him at a neutral location, a quiet cafe where we had often shared our conversations and camaraderie. When Alex arrived, he was visibly uncomfortable, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous demeanor. We exchanged brief pleasantries, but the usual warmth between us was absent. I led him to a secluded table where we could talk without interruptions. As we settled in, I took a deep breath, knowing this conversation would be as difficult as it was necessary. "Alex," I began, my voice firm but controlled. "I saw everything between you and Allison. I want to understand why this happened. You've been my closest friend. How could you do this to me?" Alex's face turned a shade of crimson as he grappled with his response. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around the room before he finally met my gaze. "Jake, I didn't think it would come to this. I didn't realize the full extent of what was happening. His voice was filled with a mix of regret and rationalization. I got involved because I wanted to be there for Allison. I thought I was helping her, and it started as something innocent, just providing emotional support. But things got out of hand. As he spoke, it became clear that his actions had been driven by a mix of selfish motives and a lack of foresight. He admitted that he had not fully considered the consequences of his involvement, and that he had been more focused on the immediate gratification and connection rather than the impact on our friendship and Allison's marriage. "I never intended for it to hurt you this way," Alex said, his voice trembling. "I see now how wrong I was. I just didn't think about how this would affect you or the trust we had." Despite his admission, I struggled to find any solace in his words. The damage had been done, and his actions had irreparably altered the landscape of our relationships. The betrayal was not just a personal loss, but a profound rupture in the bonds of trust that had once held our lives together. The conversation left me grappling with a mix of disappointment and anger, knowing that the path to healing would be long and uncertain. The discovery of Allison and Alex's betrayal left me feeling a storm of emotions: anger, heartbreak, and a need for retribution. As I struggled to process the enormity of what had happened, a single thought began to dominate my mind. I needed to take control of the situation and exact my revenge. It wasn't a decision made lightly, but the depth of their betrayal demanded a response. I started by gathering every piece of information I could find about Allison and Alex. The betrayal wasn't just an emotional blow, it had implications in both their personal and professional lives. I began meticulously compiling data on their financial situations and personal vulnerabilities, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited to exact the revenge I felt was justified. For Allison, I focused on her career. She had been climbing the corporate ladder, and I knew that a scandal involving her personal life could jeopardize her professional reputation. I collected evidence of her unprofessional conduct, including her frequent absences and questionable work habits, which I could potentially use to cast a shadow over her career achievements. Alex's situation was equally compelling. As a financial advisor, his professional reputation was crucial. I discovered several discrepancies in his financial dealings, loopholes and questionable transactions that, if exposed, could lead to serious consequences for him. Additionally, I knew personal matters that could cause him embarrassment or legal trouble, adding another layer to my plan. I spent days meticulously planning my approach, ensuring that I had all the necessary evidence and strategies in place. My goal was to create a situation where the consequences of their actions would be felt not only personally, but professionally. It was a calculated move, designed to strike at the heart of their lives in a way that would reflect the depth of their betrayal. Once my plan was set, I knew it was time to confront Allison and Alex directly, informing them of my intentions. I arranged a meeting with both of them, choosing a public place, a cafe where we had often spent time together. The setting was intended to emphasize the gravity of my decisions and to ensure that my message was clear and undeniable. As they arrived, their faces were a mix of apprehension and curiosity. They sensed that something significant was about to unfold. We sat at a corner table, and I wasted no time in laying out my position. "I've given this a lot of thought," I began, my voice steady but laden with resolve. "What you've done has irreparably damaged our lives and relationships. I've gathered information about your personal and professional weaknesses, and I want you both to understand that I intend to use this information." Allison's face went pale as I detailed how I planned to expose her unprofessional behavior and the potential consequences for her career. She attempted to interrupt, her voice trembling as she pleaded for understanding. "Jake, please don't do this. We can work this out. I'm so sorry for everything." Alex, too, was visibly shaken as I described how I could reveal the discrepancies in his financial dealings and the personal matters that could disgrace him. He tried to justify his actions, his voice filled with a mix of guilt and desperation. "I didn't think it would come to this. I made a mistake, but please reconsider. I'll do whatever it takes to make amends." Their fear and attempts to justify their actions were palpable. It was clear that they were both deeply concerned about the repercussions of my plan. Their pleas and attempts to reason with me did little to sway my resolve. The betrayal they had committed was profound, and the plan I had developed was intended to reflect the depth of the harm they had inflicted upon me. In that moment, I saw the impact of my decisions on their faces. fear, regret, and a deep sense of vulnerability. The revenge I had planned was not just about retribution, but also about asserting control and ensuring that their actions would have consequences. As I left the cafe, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness, knowing that while I had taken a step towards reclaiming my sense of justice, the emotional fallout of these actions was yet to fully unfold. The decision to exact financial revenge against Alex was not made lightly. I knew that targeting his professional life required precision and strategy, as any misstep could not only fail to achieve my goals, but also potentially backfire. I planned to leverage the information I had gathered about Alex's financial dealings, exploiting legal loopholes to create significant financial trouble for him. I began by consulting with a lawyer who specialized in financial and corporate law. I needed expert guidance to ensure that my approach was both legally sound and effective. After reviewing the evidence I had collected, my lawyer confirmed that there were indeed several discrepancies and questionable transactions in Alex's financial records that could be used to challenge his integrity and professional standing. The first step was to initiate a formal complaint with the regulatory bodies overseeing financial advisors. I prepared a comprehensive report detailing the discrepancies in Alex's transactions, including irregularities in his investment recommendations and questionable transfers of funds. The report was meticulously compiled, supported by documents and evidence that highlighted potential breaches of regulatory standards. Next, I filed a formal complaint with the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA), presenting the evidence in a way that would prompt a thorough investigation. I was careful to frame the complaint in terms of potential financial misconduct, ensuring that it was grounded in documented facts rather than personal grievances. This approach was intended to maximize the likelihood of a formal investigation and to ensure that the issues I raised would be taken seriously. Parallel to this, I also took legal action by filing a lawsuit against Alex for breach of fiduciary duty. The lawsuit was based on the evidence of his questionable financial practices and the potential harm they had caused to his clients. I worked with my lawyer to craft a compelling case that would demonstrate how Alex's actions had compromised his professional responsibilities and violated the trust placed in him by his clients. To further compound his difficulties, I also reached out to some of Alex's clients who had been affected by his financial mismanagement. I provided them with the relevant information and evidence, advising them to seek legal recourse for the losses they had incurred. This move was intended to amplify the pressure on Alex and to ensure that the financial repercussions of his actions were felt on multiple fronts. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the impact on Alex's professional life became apparent. The investigation by the regulatory authorities led to increased scrutiny of his financial practices, and the lawsuit generated negative publicity that tarnished his reputation. The combined effect of these actions created a situation where Alex faced mounting legal challenges, financial instability, and a significant loss of credibility in his field. The satisfaction of seeing Alex face the consequences of his actions was tempered by a deep sense of sadness and complexity. The revenge I had sought was unfolding, but it came with a realization of the broader implications for all involved. The financial repercussions of his misdeeds were substantial, and the process of seeking retribution had transformed not only his life, but also my sense of justice and closure. Once I had set the legal and financial wheels in motion, I turned my attention to the social repercussions Alex would face. Social isolation would be a crucial element in amplifying the impact of his betrayal, ensuring that his personal and professional circles felt the weight of his actions. I began by discreetly reaching out to Alex's colleagues and friends. With a carefully crafted narrative, I shared details of his financial misconduct and personal betrayal. My approach was calculated and strategic. I provided just enough information to stir concern and suspicion without revealing the full extent of my involvement. I made use of personal connections in social media platforms, crafting messages that hinted at Alex's ethical lapses and financial issues, prompting others to question his integrity. The effect was gradual but noticeable. Colleagues who had once been friendly began to distance themselves from Alex, their conversations marked by hushed tones and wary glances. Invitations to social and professional gatherings dwindled, and Alex found himself increasingly excluded from the circles that had once welcomed him. The social network he had relied on for support and validation began to erode, leaving him isolated and vulnerable. As the whispers and rumors spread, Alex's professional relationships began to fray. His colleagues, wary of being associated with someone under scrutiny, started to distance themselves, and his professional reputation suffered as a result. The social isolation he experienced was both a direct and indirect consequence of the financial troubles and personal betrayals that had been exposed. It was clear that his social standing was crumbling, and the once supportive environment around him had turned hostile. With Alex's social and professional circles in turmoil, I decided to take one final step to ensure that the repercussions of his actions were felt on a broader scale. I prepared an anonymous letter detailing both the affair and the financial misconduct, intending to expose Alex's transgressions to the wider community. The letter was carefully composed to include all pertinent details of Alex's betrayal and his financial irregularities, without revealing my identity. I focused on making the content compelling and shocking, ensuring that it would capture the attention of readers and stir public outrage. The goal was to create a narrative that would both inform and scandalize, impacting Alex's public reputation in a way that would be difficult to recover from. I submitted the letter to a local newspaper, choosing a publication known for its broad readership and investigative journalism. The letter was published under the guise of a concerned citizen, and it quickly drew attention from the community. The revelations included detailed accounts of Alex's affair with Allison and the fraudulent financial practices that had been uncovered. The exposure was both personal and professional, aiming to strike at the heart of Alex's public image. The publication of the letter had an immediate and dramatic effect. Alex's name was splashed across the newspaper, and the community was abuzz with the scandalous details. The public humiliation was intense. Alex found himself not only facing the wrath of those he had wronged, but also becoming a topic of public gossip and scorn. As the public reaction unfolded, Alex's reputation was severely damaged. The scandal created a spectacle that was difficult for him to escape, and the public shaming ensured that he could no longer hide from the consequences of his actions. His once respected image was now marred by scandal and disgrace, a fitting culmination to the retribution I had sought. The sense of justice was bittersweet. While Alex's public humiliation served as a form of retribution, it also left me with a complex mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. The extent of the public and social consequences underscored the depth of the betrayal and the far-reaching impact of my decisions. With Alex's public disgrace and financial ruin well underway, it was time to address the final step in the retribution process: ending my marriage with Allison. The emotional and personal betrayal had reached a point where continuing the relationship was no longer viable. My decision to proceed with a divorce was driven by a need to sever all connections and move forward with my life on my terms. I initiated the divorce process with a clear and deliberate approach. The first step was to consult with a divorce attorney who was well-versed in handling cases involving complex financial matters and emotional disputes. I needed expert guidance to ensure that the divorce proceedings would be as thorough and impactful as possible, particularly in light of the financial and personal fallout that had occurred. The divorce petition was carefully drafted, detailing the reasons for the dissolution of our marriage and outlining the terms of separation. I made it a point to include clauses that addressed the financial aspects of our separation, ensuring that Allison would receive the minimum necessary settlement while also protecting my financial interests. The legal strategy was designed to reflect the severity of the betrayal and to ensure that Allison would face significant financial consequences. When the divorce papers were served to Allison, it was a moment of profound finality. She was visibly distressed, her face pale and eyes filled with tears as she read through the document. Despite her attempts to negotiate and plead for a more favorable settlement, my resolve remained firm. The emotional weight of the betrayal was too heavy to overlook, and I was determined to ensure that the consequences were clear and unyielding. Throughout the divorce proceedings, Allison attempted to contest the terms and seek a more substantial financial settlement. She argued about the fairness of the terms and tried to negotiate for a larger share of our assets. However, my lawyer and I remained steadfast in our position, emphasizing the betrayal and the rationale behind the minimal settlement. The legal battles were contentious, but my focus was on achieving a resolution that would leave no ambiguity regarding the end of our relationship. The finalization of the divorce was a bittersweet moment. The legal separation marked the end of our marriage, but it also represented a significant personal and emotional loss. As the divorce decree was signed and the papers officially filed, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. The process had been arduous and painful, but it was necessary to close this chapter of my life and move forward. In the aftermath of the divorce, Allison's financial situation was notably strained. The minimal settlement meant she had to make significant adjustments to her lifestyle and face the reality of starting over with limited resources. The separation was not only a legal conclusion, but also a profound shift in our lives, severing the connections that had once bound us together. As I looked back on the entire process, I felt a complex blend of emotions. The retribution had been carried out, and the consequences for Allison were significant. However, the personal toll of the betrayal and the ensuing divorce was a poignant reminder of the depth of the hurt and the difficulty of navigating such a profound emotional and legal upheaval. As I look back on the tumultuous events that have unfolded over the past months, I find myself grappling with a complex mix of emotions. The revenge I sought and executed has been a journey of intense emotion, strategy, and personal resolve. Now, with everything set in motion and the consequences manifesting, I find myself reflecting deeply on the impact of these actions on my own life and psyche. The sense of satisfaction I once anticipated from seeing Allison and Alex face the repercussions of their betrayal has been tempered by an unexpected weight. The legal battles, the public humiliation, and the financial repercussions were all steps in a meticulously planned retribution. In many ways, the tangible outcomes of my efforts, Alex's professional disgrace, Allison's financial difficulties, and the dissolution of our marriage, provided a sense of justice and closure. However, this satisfaction comes with a profound realization that the pursuit of revenge has left its mark on my well-being. The emotional cost of orchestrating such a complex and harsh series of actions has been significant. While the external results of my plan were achieved, the internal effects are far less straightforward. The process of planning and executing revenge has required a level of detachment and coldness that has affected my sense of self. The emotional investment in this retribution, while initially driven by a sense of justice, has created a distance between who I was before this betrayal and who I am now. The satisfaction of seeing Allison and Alex face consequences does not fill the void left by the trust that was shattered and the relationship that was lost. The personal reflection brings to light a more nuanced understanding of the cost of revenge. The psychological toll of dealing with the constant anger, planning, and confrontation has been draining. The bitterness and frustration that fueled my actions have also left me feeling hollow at times. The satisfaction of retribution is real, but it is accompanied by a recognition of the personal sacrifices and emotional damage that accompany such a course of action. In the quiet moments of reflection, I realize that the pursuit of vengeance, while fulfilling a desire for justice, has also created a landscape of emotional complexity. The fallout from the actions taken has affected not just Allison and Alex, but has also reshaped my inner world. The path to moving forward will involve addressing these personal impacts and finding a way to reconcile with the person I have become through this journey. Ultimately, the experience has provided valuable insights into the nature of justice, revenge, and personal healing. While I achieved the retribution I sought, I am left to navigate the path of healing and self-discovery, understanding that true resolution and peace come not just from external actions, but from internal reconciliation and growth.